Our first tale begins in the heart of a bustling city, within the quiet walls of a respected art gallery. Known to most for its rotating exhibits of classical and modern pieces, the gallery was also rumored to house objects of a more secretive and possibly haunted nature. The staff themselves rarely discussed such rumors in public, but many had exchanged anxious glances when visitors lingered too long near certain paintings. One such painting was simply called the Melancholy Canvas. It hung in a dimly lit corridor just past the main exhibit hall, almost hidden from casual observers. It depicted a gaunt woman beneath a dying tree, her hair trailing like black ribbons across her shoulders. Her face was painted with extraordinary precision, each crease of despair meticulously detailed, her hollow eyes seeming to well up with sorrowful tears. The canvas itself appeared ancient. The edges were cracked and some of the paint had started to flake. Somehow, this imperfection only added to its unsettling charm. The story truly takes shape when a newcomer named Emma drifted into the gallery one afternoon. She had never been much of an art enthusiast, but she was accompanying a friend who worked there. While her friend attended to some paperwork, Emma wandered aimlessly until she reached the Melancholy Canvas. The moment she laid eyes on it, her pulse quickened. She couldn't move away, couldn't look anywhere else. It wasn't just curiosity or aesthetic admiration. There was a tug at her heart, as if the figure within the painting was calling out to her. For minutes, maybe hours, Emma stood transfixed until a faint headache forced her to break away. Only when she turned did she realize the gallery lights were dimmer and the corridors emptier than before, as if she had slipped into a time-lost reverie. Over the next few weeks, Emma found herself returning to the gallery, at times with tickets purchased in advance, other times by convincing her friend to let her wander after hours. Each time she approached the melancholy canvas, she swore the posture of the painted woman had shifted slightly. Her head might be angled a fraction differently, or a subtle new crack might appear across her pale cheek. Emma questioned her own memory, but something about the changes felt intentional. Late one night, when the gallery had closed, Emma lingered until she was sure no one was around. She had decided to photograph the painting with her phone to prove she wasn't imagining these alterations. As soon as she lined up the shot, the overhead lights flickered. A nauseating wave of vertigo washed over her, causing her to stumble. When she tried to check the phone, the image file was nothing but a corrupted blur. Haunted by these experiences, Emma began investigating the painting's history. She spoke discreetly to the gallery staff, some of whom recounted eerie sensations or glimpses of movement out of the corner of their eyes when passing by the painting after closing. Eventually, Emma discovered a series of old letters penned by the gallery's founder. They described how the melancholy canvas had been acquired from the estate of a tormented artist in the 1800s, a man whose wife had died of a slow, wasting illness. According to legend, overcome by grief, he used a unique blend of pigments mixed with strands of her hair and drops of her blood, hoping to immortalize her spirit within his magnum opus. In the final letter, the founder wrote that the piece made him physically ill whenever he stood too close, and that rumors persisted of visitors who had fallen into states of melancholia after prolonged viewing. Emma's nights became plagued with nightmares. She would see the painting on the backs of her eyelids, a static figure in the darkness, sometimes turning to face her. She would wake up short of breath, convinced she had heard the woman in the painting whisper her name. Shadows flitted through her apartment, and flickers of movement appeared in mirrors, a silhouette that resembled the gaunt figure on the canvas. Feeling her sanity slip, Emma resolved to confront the painting one last time. One stormy evening, she snuck into the gallery via a side entrance. Rain pelted the roof as thunder rumbled ominously. Standing there, in the dim flickering emergency lights, Emma noticed the painted woman now bore a faint smile, small but unmistakable. A chill crawled up Emma's spine, and she found herself stepping closer, as if in a trance. She reached out to touch the cracked paint. The second her fingertips brushed the canvas, an icy shock traveled up her arm. The woman's eyes shifted to lock onto Emma's. A crushing weight pressed down on her soul, like cold fingers digging into her chest. She felt an overwhelming sadness that wasn't her own, as though the spirit trapped inside the painting was siphoning Emma's life to feed its endless grief. Fighting back tears, Emma tore herself free and stumbled out of the gallery. In her haste, she glanced back only once, catching a glimpse of the painting's surface rippling, as if the figure within was struggling to break through. Emma never returned to that corridor. Some months later, she admitted to her friend that she still felt drained, like a part of her essence remained with that haunting canvas. Interestingly, subsequent visitors began reporting a new detail in the painting. In the background, behind the forlorn woman, a faint outline of another figure sometimes appeared, someone with Emma's hairstyle and posture, trapped forever in the silent sorrow of the melancholy canvas. Our second story takes us far from the art world and into a quaint library on the edge of a small town. This library was proudly old-fashioned. Wooden shelves stacked high with cloth-bound tomes, worn carpets in warm colors, and librarians who greeted patrons with kind smiles. For decades, it was the heart of the community, a place where children discovered the magic of books and adults found quiet solace among ancient texts. Despite its wholesome ambiance, there were whispers of hidden passages and sealed-off reading rooms. Older staff members would share ghost stories about hearing books fall when no one was there, or glimpsing shadowy figures among the shelves after hours. None of these rumors deterred Anna, a new librarian who had just moved to town. She adored the comforting scent of old parchment, the hush of a place devoted to study, and the charm of small-town life. On her first week, she discovered a locked cabinet in the back storage room where no patrons were allowed. Inside, she found a bundle of centuries-old books, each bound in leather with yellowed pages and curious symbols on the covers. The titles were written in archaic languages she couldn't decipher, and the illustrations were deeply unsettling. A series of anatomical drawings with missing limbs, cryptic symbols reminiscent of alchemy, and faintly demonic sketches. Intrigued by the mystery, Anna set them aside on a restricted shelf, intending to research their origin. Over the following days, unusual events began to disturb the normally tranquil library. Every time Anna tried to shelve books near that restricted section, she felt a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, as though someone stood just behind her. When the library was empty late at night, the overhead lights would flicker in a slow, deliberate pattern, and she would hear the faintest footsteps echoing in the corridors above. Hoping it was mere coincidence, Anna pressed on with her duties. Yet the books seemed to call out to her, filling her dreams with half-recalled phrases she swore she'd never read before. Driven by curiosity, Anna stayed late one night, determined to translate even a snippet of the cryptic text within these old volumes. She set up a small desk lamp in the back corner, away from the main hall, so as not to draw attention from passers-by. For hours, she struggled to recognize any pattern in the text, occasionally referencing old language dictionaries and online archives. She found scattered references to an ancient order of scholars who used secret signs to map out portals hidden in human dwellings, places like libraries, crypts, and monasteries. Their notes described something called the Silent Stacks Ritual, which was said to give shape to a gateway if certain books were arranged in a precise sequence. As the clock neared midnight, a hush fell over the building. The overhead lights gave one final flicker before dimming altogether. Anna found herself alone in near-total darkness, relying on the glow of her lamp. A hush so profound settled over the library that she heard her own heartbeat in her ears. That's when a voice, raspy and distant, seemed to drift through the shelves. "We must open the way." Gathering her courage, Anna rose from her desk and peered down the aisles. She caught a glimpse of a robed figure gliding between the shelves, its silhouette too thin and too tall to be human. Books began sliding from their places, each thudding against the floor in a pattern, like footsteps marching toward her. She turned to flee, but something brushed her ankle, cold and slick like an icy hand. She stumbled, accidentally knocking over her lamp. Darkness swallowed her. The sound of sliding books intensified, a continuous rustle of pages filling the air. Out of sheer desperation, Anna crawled toward the front desk, feeling her way by memory. Twice, she thought she felt a bony hand graze her shoulder. A shape moved in the peripheral darkness, impossibly tall, its breath rasping like ancient parchment. She could see pale lights flickering in the space around it, perhaps the ghostly glimmer of the ritual's gateway. Summoning a final surge of strength, she dashed toward the exit and slammed into the locked front doors. Her heart thundered as she fumbled with the keys, finally managing to wrench the door open and spill out onto the sidewalk. By the time she returned the next day with the local police chief, who also happened to be a frequent library patron, everything was in perfect order. The restricted shelf stood empty, as though the strange books had vanished. The security cameras, having been tampered with at some point, showed only static. Though the chief was sympathetic, he found no evidence of intruders, no sign of damage or theft. In the days that followed, Anna remained haunted by the image of that robed figure, drifting through the stacks and rearranging books for some arcane purpose. She was tormented by the idea that she had come perilously close to witnessing, or worse, facilitating, the opening of a portal best left closed. Every so often she'd catch a glimpse of a misplaced book or an unaccounted for volume she swore hadn't been in the system before. But she never stayed late again. Whatever lurked within the silent stacks, she vowed to leave it undisturbed. Our final tale takes us to an unremarkable stretch of highway where weary travelers might stumble upon Mabel's diner. The establishment was a relic of the 1950s, sporting faded teal booths, a polished chrome counter, and a neon sign out front that flickered more often than it glowed. Regulars swore Mabel's had the best coffee for miles around, and Mabel herself, a plump, warm-hearted woman well into her 60s, kept the doors open at all hours. She said she never wanted a soul to pass by in need, especially on stormy nights. But lately, strange storms had been rolling in unpredictably, and folks began reporting peculiar sights on the nearby roads. It was around this time that a wayward hitchhiker named Connor appeared just before midnight, drenched by torrential rain. Connor entered the diner, shivering, and took a seat at the counter. Mabel offered him a sympathetic smile and a mug of steaming coffee. She asked what brought him out on such a rough night, but he only shook his head, too tired or too reluctant to answer. Everything about the place felt oddly comforting to him. The homey smell of fried food, the glow of fluorescent lights reflected in the checkerboard floor. He noticed the clock above the register had stopped at 12:13 a.m. and wondered how long it had been broken. The passing of time felt fuzzy, as though the diner existed in a small pocket of reality all its own. Partway through his meal, Connor felt a sudden tension in the air. The front door opened without the jangle of the overhead bell. A stranger in a tattered coat walked in. Although Connor hadn't heard an approaching vehicle, he assumed the man might be another hitchhiker. Mabel offered a polite greeting, but Connor sensed an undercurrent of unease in her voice. The stranger's eyes flashed briefly with a reflective glint, like an animal's caught in headlights. His face was gaunt, cheeks sunken, and he seemed uncertain about how to move, as if walking took a conscious effort. He slid onto a stool not far from Connor, responding to Mabel's courtesy with a series of slow nods. Silence stretched between them, interrupted only by the low hum of the fluorescent lights. After a moment, Connor excused himself, intending to freshen up and maybe let the man settle without feeling observed. Just as Connor entered the narrow hallway leading to the restrooms, he heard Mabel's hushed, urgent tone. She said something about a promise, about how this couldn't continue. Then the stranger spoke, and his voice seemed to change mid-sentence, first normal, then dropping into a raspy whisper that made Connor's skin crawl. The small hairs on Connor's arms stood on end. The air thickened, electrified, as though a storm was forming indoors. Suddenly, Mabel gave a stifled cry. Connor rushed back to the dining area. The lights flickered dangerously, casting disjointed shadows on the walls. Mabel clutched her forearm, blood trickling down her sleeve. Her eyes flicked to Connor, silently begging for help. The stranger turned toward them with an eerie grin. His face flickered for just an instant, revealing something inhuman beneath his skin, a maw lined with jagged teeth, eyes glowing faintly gold. A chilling breeze swept through the diner, rattling plates on the tables. Connor felt the primal urge to run, to put as much distance between himself and that impossible visage as he could. Mabel, despite her injury, grabbed Connor's arm and tugged him toward the door. The stranger advanced on them with unnatural speed, his coat flapping around him like living shadows. A heavy scent of ozone filled the air, akin to the moment before lightning strikes. With one desperate push, Mabel shoved Connor through the entrance, and they both tumbled outside into the rain. The door slammed behind them with a force that nearly shook the windows from their frames. Clambering into Mabel's rusted pickup, Connor floored the gas pedal, skidding onto the deserted highway. In the rearview mirror, the diner's neon sign sputtered like a dying heartbeat, casting brief flashes of pink and green against the stormy sky. Hours later, once they found safety in a neighboring town, they returned with the authorities. Yet Mabel's diner appeared lifeless and locked up. No sign of a struggle, no trace of the stranger. Even the clock above the register, which Connor clearly remembered being stuck at 12:13, now read 2:27. Days passed, and rumors circulated among travelers who claimed they spotted Mabel's diner where it shouldn't have been, at different mile markers, or even entirely different highways. Some said they entered to find nothing amiss. Others claimed they saw shapes in the reflection of the windows, pacing behind the counter. In time, Connor tried to forget the ordeal, but each night he dreamed of that ghastly face flickering in the fluorescent glow. He wondered if Mabel still tended her diner, trapped in an endless midnight shift, serving food to lost souls who wandered in from the dark. These three stories show us that horror can take on many shapes: a painting that refuses to remain static, a library whose shelves hold unread texts that may open portals, and a lonely diner on a desolate road where something unearthly lurks beneath a human mask. Until next time, thank you for joining me.